I want to commend all of you for being here today and being vulnerable enough to show up, to have this conversation. That is a major first step. And I hope today, hope seeing all of the people who are on this call helps at least begin to normalize the fact that you are not alone in this. And the research shows that up to about 70% of people have imposter syndrome, struggle with imposter syndrome at some point in their career. And actually, even newer research done in 2019 shows that up to 50% of both men and women struggle with imposter syndrome on a weekly basis. A weekly basis. So you are far from alone if this is something you battle with. And as Jess was saying, the best place to start is probably with defining what imposter syndrome is. So some of your comments, oh, and I'm just checking the chat here. Lots of California, Maryland, Seattle, awesome, amazing, all over. Great. So, Liz had popped some of your comments in here about what imposter syndrome means to you. You had said feelings of inadequacy, undeserved recognition and accomplishment, when you're the only one in the room, downing the relevance of your experience. So all of this speaks to the fact that imposter syndrome is really a phenomenon wherein we have certain thoughts that lead us to think we are intellectual frauds, that we're just faking it, and pretty soon everybody is going to find out that we're not as smart or accomplished or capable as they think we are. We have tricked them into believing that. And then at any moment, somebody's going to come along and say, the jig is up, pack up your stuff, you got to go. Or we feel like we can't replicate the success we have had in the future. So you may feel like a little bit of a one-hit wonder, and explain away your successes as a result of luck, timing, that you had connections, it was teamwork, right? So imposter syndrome fundamentally is a disconnect in your self-perception. You are smart and capable, but you don't see yourself like that. So it's really a disconnect in your identity of how you see yourself. So I hope that helps clarify a little bit of what the definition is. And if you have any questions about that, you can go ahead and put them in the chat and I can go ahead and answer them. Yeah. Liz or Jess, did we have any other specific questions that we wanted to start out with?
So one of the questions that got submitted on the form was talking a lot about, she said, I understand, or yes, it wasn't, sorry, I'm looking at the list right now. She said, I understand that what the definition is, but what I'm not sure of is why it makes me feel so fraudulent if it's actually, sorry, somebody coming in, why it makes me feel like such a fraud and how I start to move away from that.
Yeah, so imposter syndrome, why it makes you feel like a fraud is because of the thoughts that you think about yourself. That's what it comes, it's an interaction of the way you perceive yourself, many times often with the environment that you're in. So imposter syndrome tends to be exaggerated if you are in an environment that is extremely competitive, if there is a high value placed on external achievements or success. It can many times happen if you were the one in your family who was called, the smart one, or if you played that role growing up, you start to have that identity of I need to be Superwoman or Superman, or I need to know everything and have everything all together before I speak up in a meeting, or things always came easily to me. If maybe you were the kid who just picked up on things really easily. As an adult, if something is hard for you, you feel like a fraud because you can't do it. So it can come from our background. It can come from the environment that we're in. And certainly one of the environmental factors, there's intersectionality here, because if you literally are different, if you are a person of color, or neurologically, if you're wired differently. For example, I work with a lot of people who are highly sensitive in that they perceive their environment more deeply. They're literally wired deeply. They have a genetic trait difference that leads them to perceive the environment around them more deeply. So if you start to feel different because you are different than the majority of what's happening around you, so that can make you feel like I don't belong here, right? So it's not just one thing that leads to that, but fundamentally where what drives imposter syndrome is the negative self-talk, is the things like I was saying before, like um, my accomplishment was just attributable to luck, or I can't offer an idea unless I know 100% that it's going to work. Um, Imposter syndrome also tends to show up many times as um, people pleasing over functioning, because you don't feel good enough. You feel like you have to
Mm.
prove your worth and your value through overworking, and you overcompensate with that. So the way you start changing it, the as much as I wish there was an easy button, you have to realize that we're undoing, in many instances, decades of conditioning, right? Decades of thinking a certain way. And actually, let me back up, because it can be helpful to understand that imposter syndrome is actually a pretty predictable cycle. So, what causes it is we have some sort of a professional, or we have some sort of a stressor, usually professionally related, somehow related to our intellect, that sets off, we perceive this as stressful, as it's going to challenge us, and that sets off a chain reaction of very predictable thoughts and emotions. Things like anxiety, self-doubt, the worries about, can I do this, all of that lovely stuff. And then in general, people fall into two different camps of responding to that. On one side, you have people that double down by being uber diligent. So these are your perfectionist type, these are the overfunctioner, overworking type people, and so they double down by doing more and almost trying to control the situation. On the other hand, you have a general category of people who respond by avoiding. So they retreat, they shy away from challenges, they procrastinate because they worry that if they complete the thing and they don't do it well, that will prove that they're actually a fraud. That will expose them as the fraud they believe that they are, right? So you
Mm.
have those two general camps that people fall into as coping mechanisms. And and then nevertheless, because you are smart and capable, you succeed at whatever the thing is, but you push it away. You are not able to internalize your achievements, which is a hallmark of imposter syndrome, because you don't believe it. You do not internalize it, so you push it away, you disregard it, and then you feel like a fraud, and the cycle goes around and around again. So I say that because it can be helpful to realize that imposter syndrome is very much a predictable cycle, and you can gain control by intervening at various stages of that cycle. So, like I said, the first line of intervention, but probably also the hardest, is by starting to change your thoughts and reframe your thoughts around imposter syndrome. Um, so let me, and if anybody wants to put an example in the comments, you're more than welcome to. Um, but I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head about how we would reframe a certain situation. Um, let's see.
Melody, sorry, I'm just going to
Yeah.
interrupt quickly because one message I'm getting privately here in the chat is, can Melody address head on why this is something that women experience more than men, and why it can be so hard to explain to men? I've had a really hard time explaining this even to my own brother and male coworkers.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is that the research shows that men and women actually experience imposter syndrome on almost an equal level. So surprisingly, women slightly more. I think the latest research I've seen said women experience imposter syndrome weekly. About 52% report yes, about 48% of men. But what tends to
Mm.
happen, where we see the biggest divide, is that as they rise through the ranks. So, as women become more senior and advance in their careers, their imposter syndrome tends to become much worse. Whereas for
Hmm.
men, it tends to be alleviated. So, uh, this is for a number of reasons. Again, it goes back to socialization. A lot of women are grown up with the messages of don't rock the boat, tall poppy syndrome, don't outshine others. It's not right to brag about yourself. A woman is seen, not heard, so to speak. And we walk a tightrope in the workplace where, in order to advance in your career, you do have to become more assertive and put yourself out there, but you can't do that too much or else you're called the B word. So it very much is a tightrope. Um, and women face a lot of demands as well. There's a lot of role overload for women. They have to be the mother, they have to be the great executive, they have to do this and that can lead to, well, I'm not doing any of it well, so I must be a fraud. If everyone else, there's comparison in there that everyone else seems to like they have it all together, but I don't. Um, so those tend to be the reasons why women experience this more acutely.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Given those factors and how it increases for women, which is unfortunate because you think that the more senior you get, you might feel more comfortable. How do you
Right.
recommend that people go about talking about this then?
Yeah, it depends who you're talking about it to. Um, do you have something in mind? Because I think there's a difference. There's a difference between how you talk about it to your colleagues, to how you talk about it to people who are, more senior than you and you're trying to influence, to how you talk about it with your team. I think starting with your team, it's actually very helpful. I've had a lot of women who I coach come to me and say that really being able to mentor others, mentorship is one of the fastest paths to overcoming your own imposter syndrome, to realize that you have knowledge to give back to other people, that
Mm,
you have something to teach that's of value to someone is really, really rewarding. Um, and especially surfacing some of the concerns that you might have faced in your career and sharing that with your team to say, hey, I can remember when I was in your shoes, this is what I was facing and what I was thinking. So if this is ever coming up for you, you can let me know and we'll work through it together.
hmm,
Um, with your colleagues, I think you want to make sure you have a trusting relationship with whoever you're opening up to in this way. You want to make sure that whatever information you're going to share with them about your vulnerabilities, that you can do so in a way that's going to be psychologically safe and that you can be supported in that. I think your colleagues and many times your boss, if you have a good relationship with your boss, can actually be your greatest champions. Your colleagues, if you're able to go to a colleague and say, I'm really trying to get over this hump of putting myself out there and being more vocal about what I do. So if you ever see me downplaying my accomplishments or pushing something off, call me out on that. Hold me accountable. You can also use that idea of shine theory. I shine, you shine idea. So you can also amplify each other's successes and your voices. Um, so I think that's a great way to think about it with your colleagues. And also I've had people do that who have a strong relationship with their boss, recruit their boss in that as
mm,
well. um, and also your boss can be the person who opens doors for you to more challenging projects, for example, and who gives you the vote of confidence to say, I believe in you, I know you can do this. um, and so that's they can put you in situations that will challenge you but ultimately grow you.
mm. That's a great point. I'm just going to pause for a minute because I'm getting some amazing comments here. I don't know if anybody who is direct messaging me feels comfortable going off of mute because you guys are sharing some fantastic insights that I think we'd all benefit from. So I'd love to pause and see if anybody is willing to share, and know that this is a very safe community, no judgment. If you haven't joined Kunik before, we welcome a lot of open sharing and conversation, and we promise to respect and accept everyone.
Circle of trust.
Exactly.
Yeah. Virtual circle of trust.
I have something I wanted to contribute. You were asking a little bit earlier about like drilling down to that feeling, and that's a thing that comes up in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yep.
They talk about there's an event, and then you have feelings about that event, and
Yep.
then the reaction is to your feelings about that event.
Mhm.
And so it's the ability of being able to divorce what I'm feeling about the event from the event's existence.
100%. And you're so right. That's so many of the techniques change your thoughts for the better are directly drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy. You're 100% right, and that's great. I would love to know, Cassie, if you have an example of how that has worked for you.
I honestly, the biggest thing that's worked for me with imposter syndrome is leaning into being a trickster goddess. I embrace the fact that I have the ability to trick all of these people into thinking that I am smart, capable, and a functional human being.
I hear you. That, hey,
I have about 75% success with it, which is better than nothing.
You bring up, thank you for sharing that. You bring up such a great point that one small tool I like to use with my clients and that they get really into is personifying the voice of imposter syndrome, otherwise known as our inner critic, whatever you want to call it. But if you can make it a character, like Cassie, you brought so much lightness and humor to it that it disempowers it, right? And so I have had clients, you know, call theirs Darth Vader. I had one client who then got a Darth Vader Lego figure and kept it on his desk and, you know, would kind of talk back at it whenever his inner critic would chime up. So it can be very helpful to gaining psychological distance from this voice, to see it as something separate from you and just, this is a passing thought. This is a chemical reaction in my brain that's happening to certain stressors. I don't need to buy into this. What is a better thought that serves me? And this is where this an idea of self-coaching comes in, of what is a thought, a healthier thought that serves me. If I was confident and I knew what to do, what would I be thinking then? What would a person I admire do? If I think about the version of me that is 5 years in the future and know this situation is going to work out, then what would I think? What would I tell me now? So that's really powerful. So thank you for sharing.